I think a few of you have seen my other session already here. My name is Jeff Fritz. I'm a program manager on the Asp Net team. And we're going to talk a little bit about using Asp Net on a Mac, using Linux type commands on a Mac. I'm going to do a lot of this at the command line. All right. So let me grab my notes here. I forgot my notes. Notes. So, right, I mentioned this yesterday. There's a bunch of different .NET frameworks, right? And we've got different sizes to the frameworks and runtimes. And really, this is an intro type of slide where we really talk about how we wanted to have for ASP.NET Core, when we decided to do, right, this new framework, we wanted something that was thin and you could optimize and get really, really fast on the server. So, right, we still have that desktop framework that we use on ASP.NET 4.6, but we want something thin and fast. And actually, if you look here, the size of the framework for ASP.NET Core is about the size of the framework for Windows Phone. And that's not a coincidence, actually. We're using some of the same bits there. We've rebuilt that, and that's part of what we use for ASP.NET Core. And, right, most of ASP.NET is open source. I talked about this the other day, right? ASP.NET 4.6, except for the things in system.web, are open source, right? Everything else, MVC, Web API, SignalR, all open source. Entity Framework. And then, of course, everything in ASP.NET Core, .NET Core, completely open source. Very, very cool stuff. I don't think I need to go through that too much more. We know it's cross-platform. System.web is not part of ASP.NET Core, which means you don't have web forms in ASP.NET Core. Does that make anybody upset? Does that make anybody happy? Camera guy, okay. And you down here, okay. So I've actually heard some people get very upset. I mean, screaming, complaining on forums that they're upset that web forms is not part of ASP.NET Core. Okay, hey, it's still there, we still support it. So, there are 7 design tenets when we decided to build ASP.NET Core. And because we're going to be doing all this stuff on a Mac, I'm actually going to hit a bunch of these. I'm going to show you a faster development lifecycle. I'm on a Mac. I don't have Visual Studio 2015 here, so we're going to be choosing a different editor. And cross-platform, of course, fast. We'll see how fast it is. I'm not going to get into the transition stuff, but totally modular, you will see that. So some of the open source story in this, right, allows us to choose different versions of ASP.NET Core, which is kind of weird to say that there's different versions, because of course the primary version that we want to see is this Visual Studio version, right? The version of .NET that comes with Visual Studio, which typically in the past gets launched with the version of Windows, which makes keeping things up to speed with the modern web kind of crazy to do in the past, because anything that needed to be updated because HTTP 2 happens or something like that, we need to update Windows, and then we need to update Visual Studio, and then we can update ASP.NET. So, all right, when we start to break out of that box, well, now we've got different versions and timings on things that we can deploy things. So, of course, we have long-term support available with Visual Studio when we do an RTM, okay? So there's update 3 that's available right now that will give you the RTM of the framework bits. You can get it at .net, you can get packages and all your libraries at nuget.org. But if you're interested in getting something a little bit more bleeding edge, you can start looking at betas, CTPs, right, Community Technology Previews, or betas. If you go to .net or to nuget.org, you can get the betas that we officially declare there. Now that's when we officially declare a beta. Well, this is open source, and we make our nightly build server available. So you can actually go to myget.org and get our nightlies if you're really interested in getting some things that are just certified as passing through and a little bit more fresh. And of course, you can even go right to the source. There's dev branches on our stuff in GitHub. There are folks that compile, and they go and run with that stuff. Now, you have no support when you start working with these things, okay? Let me make that perfectly clear. If you are doing work with source or nightly drops, you're pretty much on your own, okay? There's documentation with the source code. If you're building and using that stuff on your own, Microsoft will not, on a paid support contract, support you, okay? We only do paid support on the betas that we declare have go live and for the things that are marked as RTM, okay? But if you're into open source and if you're doing stuff on Linux or a Mac and you're doing development, you probably are, right? You may be more interested in these things, and you're probably used to seeing community support with the engineers in GitHub issues or on Gitter. They hang out there, and they do listen, and they do talk to community members. And when we talked about putting .NET out in the open, we actually saw some amazing accomplishments, right? Fully open source, right? There's 175 repositories, 24,000 forks. Marketing, for some reason, loves putting the number of forks on there, and they don't understand somebody made a copy of your source code, so if it changes over here, I've got a snapshot, right? They don't quite understand that. And then 4,200 contributors. That's actually, we've opened up and looked a little bit further across all of our repositories because much more of Microsoft is being made open source. We've actually got closer to 22,000 contributors now between all of .NET and all of ASP.NET that's now open source. But I think you guys saw yesterday, if you were in Scott's session, in our dev labs, we get 1.15 million requests per second. When we scale up to the same size performance labs as the standardized tests that are out there, which is, it's like a 16-core machine with gigs and gigs of RAM, we get closer to 5 million requests per second on those more standard performance tests. So more than 6 times the performance of Node and more than 40% of the performance gains that we've realized in ASP.NET have come from the community. So huge, huge things to really show that we're open source, we're in the community, and we mean it. So much so that we're putting our money where our mouth is. Have you guys heard of Dotnet Foundation? So a couple of you nodding. So we've done a ton of things here where we support and we help pay some of those project management fees for a bunch of projects out there, open source projects, and some of these are our projects, and some of these are very much community ones. So things like Umbraco, right? That's an open source content management system. We help support them. Open LiveWriter, right? That was the old Windows LiveWriter. People loved using that for writing their blog posts. Well, we made that open source. We released it, and now there's a community of folks that are working on that. But we've also open sourced, of course, Mono. That's a big one, right? And we're fully supporting Mono. And the other really big one that folks are excited about, of course, is Xamarin, right? Because we acquired Xamarin and we took their SDKs, we made them open source. Anybody can use them, and you can download the Xamarin tools and use them with Visual Studio 2015. But that's great that you have these frameworks and you know, these things that the .NET Foundation will do for you, but when you actually get down to wanting to write code on your Mac, right? There's a bunch of different editors. I mean, do you really want to use VI or Emacs or, right? You can download Atom or Brackets, and they don't support .NET. You don't get that same level of experience on those editors, right? Because it's VI, right? You're all on the keyboard. And really, the state of an editor with that advanced productivity experience that we expect from Visual Studio, it's a dumpster, what do they call it? A dumpster fire? Yeah, right? Well, in Philly, we call it a dumpster pool. This really happened. These guys, they set up a dumpster in the middle of the street, put a liner in it, and funneled water from the fire hydrant and made a dumpster pool. So dumpster pool is actually a little bit more appropriate here because we want everybody to jump in with us. So much so that we built something called Omni Sharp. Now, Omni Sharp is a library, it's an add-on for these editors that you're probably familiar with, but you can go to omnisharp.net and you can install this add-on and it will give you a rich IntelliSense inside of Atom and Brackets, Emacs. VI was the one that kind of blew my mind when I first saw that. Really neat that you get this rich IntelliSense Visual Studio-like experience when you edit your code on a Mac, on Linux. It works on both environments. So that's pretty cool. And we did release stuff for Windows. Visual Studio 2015 Update 3 has full support for our stuff. That's on Windows. The current version of Visual Studio Code is 131, and we'll see Visual Studio Code here for a bit. That's our new editor that we've built that runs on Mac, Linux, and Windows. We've got a command line tool that's version 101 as of right now. These tools, though, were shipped other than the update 3. The command line and some of the other templates and things inside of Visual Studio were marked as Preview 2, and some people get a little uncomfortable about that. The RTM of the libraries is already out, but the tools, like the command line, are marked Preview 2, and we did this with Windows 10 last year, right? Windows 10 came out in July, Visual Studio came out in July, and the tools to build those Windows 10 applications were marked Preview, and they weren't finalized till a month or two later. So we're doing the same thing here. When Visual Studio 15 comes out, you'll have the full RTM versions on Windows, and we'll have updated versions of tools for Mac. Okay, enough slides. Let's actually see this at work, right? So we've done the intro. You guys know enough about what Asp Net Core is. Let's actually do something with this. Let's figure out why my mouse isn't working. Cool. All right, do we have? There we go. So let me get rid of this for now. All right. So of course, how do you get .NET onto a Mac? Let's start there. Let's start at the beginning. Easiest way to get .NET is actually at .NET, which sounds kind of weird to say it the first time because you sound like you're stuttering, but it's .NET. And it routes you to another site here that's actually the .NET Install page for Asp Net Core for cross-platform server apps, right? That's how it's labeled here. Click through, and it'll automatically choose based on your operating system. And there's just a few things you need to do with Brew, right? We've got everything wired up with Brew so that you can install your libraries that support the .NET SDK. There's an official installer. You end up doing the little drag and drop thing inside of your application configuration, and it just is done. Now, everything runs on the command line here. So we have a .NET command line. I've already got it installed here. I'm not going to go through the install process because hotel Wi-Fi. Do you need to have admin access? No. Nope. It'll install because we put down, and this is one of the things that's nice about .NET Core and Asp Net Core is we want you to be able to lift and bring the entire framework, everything you need to run your application, and put it in a folder and not need admin access. There it is in the folder, and there it's running, versus right on Windows, we have the GAC, and you need admin access to write things into the Windows folder and all that stuff, and it's a shared framework. We do have shared frameworks here, but you can run your own version of everything side by side with other folders without having any kind of collision. So we call it a portable framework because you can pick up and put down just what you need. So, good question, thank you. So let me open a terminal because we do everything on a terminal, right? Okay, so I've actually written a dev folder here, and let's start writing our first .NET application here. So I will call this, let's call this Mac on the Beach. And I'll go into that folder. And we can start a new application by saying .NET new. But there's a bunch of other commands behind this that we can use. We can actually change the language and say, give me an F# project, and I can specify different types of projects. And right now, this is a preview release. There's 3 types of project: console, class library, and web. So let's build a web application with C#. .NET new -t web. Done. New web project is built. Don't believe me? There it is. So the next command is .NET restore, right? I need to restore my packages. So I'll say .NET restore, and I should, excuse me, I should have all my packages installed and copied down locally. So all that it's really going to be doing is writing out a copy of my project JSON file that has all the pointers to my packages, and here it comes. So we want you to have a 3-command experience to start running new projects, right? I ran .NET New, .NET Restore, and then I want to be able to say .NET Run, and it will compile because it hasn't been compiled before. And when it's done, it's configured and it's running for me. I can browse to the application, right? So localhost 5000. And there it is. There's my web application, and I can see here, because I'm running on the console, all my log information, and I can show you here in the startup class, all of my log information is dropped right into the console for me, or I could echo it out to a log file, whatever, but I can see every single request that comes through to my application. Not bad. Okay, we're getting somewhere here. Now, if you're an open source developer and you're on Linux or Mac, you're probably used to seeing, I did CLS again. You're probably used to seeing Bower, gulp, right? Bower, gulp, where is it? Package JSON's hiding here. Package JSON, so your NPM stuff, it's all here. So by default, we're going to give you the ability to use those tools that you're probably really familiar with. And that's up to you. That's your choice, right? We think that these are a good choice because we're not reinventing something. We don't need to go out and figure out our own JavaScript framework because there's already stuff out there that folks like and use. And our own JavaScript package manager stuff, because people like this stuff. So why reinvent it? So one of the things that we've done to kind of help wire things up is inside of Project JSON, at the very end, there it is. So we have these scripts. Let me minimize that. So we have these scripts here. And these are commands that you can execute when things are going to be published and after they're done being published. So when you go to publish your application, you're going to pick up just those files needed to run it. And that's why we have this include thing here. These are the things that we want to include besides our binaries when we go to publish this to some other location. And then we're going to execute, well, before we move it, we're going to execute npm install, then Bower install, gulp clean, gulp min, things that if you're a Node developer should feel pretty normal, pretty garden variety stuff. Now what's interesting though is the post-publish, .NET publish IIS. If you're not on Windows, that actually is a no op and it just fails silently. So kind of what you would expect to happen. So we've got a nice way for you to hook up your own tools if something else comes along, right? Maybe you like breakfast. I know we just had breakfast, but the breakfast tool to automate things, you can call breakfast from here and have it configure things for you. Right? Maybe you want to do some, well, you would do linting inside of gulp. But if any of those things fail, it'll stop the publish process at that point and it won't continue. So kind of those things that you would expect. So .NET New gave me a nice little application up and running, and it's what Microsoft is prescribing and packaging with the tool. But this is open source. This is a nice environment where I can do other things. So there's a community effort that has created the Yeoman generators. So we actually have, I won't do an npm install. There is a generator called Asp Net. So I can say yo Asp Net, and I get prompted to choose and build from several different templates. And this is nice. These templates are actually designed to mirror those templates that you find in Visual Studio, with a couple of extra ones here that it doesn't come with in Visual Studio that the community finds valuable, like the unit test project. So I'm going to come down and choose a web application basic without membership and authentication. I don't like security. What can I tell you? I can choose which UI framework. I'm a big fan of Bootstrap. And we'll call this Code on the Beach 2. Right, it's already done. And now our generator comes through and it runs Bower install, it runs npm install, and we're done. So I can do the same thing here, Code on the Beach, .NET Restore. Now, I mentioned that it generates this lock file thing. Have you guys seen the project lock JSON file? Okay, you've seen it. It's just pointers. So project lock JSON. We've seen what project JSON is. This is just pointers to the different DLLs and where they live on disk. It's not intended to be human readable. You don't need to check this in with your project, because when you pull something out of source code and you do a .NET restore, it'll rebuild this for you. Okay? So don't worry about this file. It's really there to help the compiler. And it doesn't get shipped when you deploy either, right? Neither does project JSON for that matter. So that's the Yeoman generators and a little bit of what they do. Not bad. What I like about these is that these guys actually decided to package a Docker file. So simple configuration to get Docker up and running and out the door. Not bad. I mean, right, it's just copying things into an app folder. It runs .NET Restore, .NET Build, just like we did, and then .NET Run. Now, there's a server URLs argument you can pass in to specify where you want the ASP.NET Core host to listen. So we're going to listen on all IPs on port 5000. That's kind of a default for our Kestrel web server. We want to make sure that it's not on port 80, because lots of folks like to compete for port 80, right? So that's not bad. Now, I mentioned that that project lock JSON is pointing to all these different DLLs and things. Well, where do they live? Where do my Nuget packages live? Because when I was on Windows, there used to be a packages folder inside my project, right? Well, now it lives right off of your home folder. So there's Nuget. And I can go down into packages, and let's go get Microsoft ASP.NET Core. Or I could be, come on now, yes. I thought I had Microsoft ASP.NET Core. There it is. MVC. So there's MVC. It's sitting on disk inside of my personal folder. So whenever I build an application, it's going to reach in and grab this version, or one of these versions that I may have here, and use that inside my application. So if you start getting a crunch on disk space, feel free to come in and clear out your .NuGet folder. The next time you do a .NET restore, if it's not local, it'll go download those packages from the web, put it down, and then unpackage them appropriately. So that's where your packages live. Now, I mentioned the editor. Let's take a look at Visual Studio Code. I'm going to come back to my code on the beach. So I've actually got it wired up to the code command line. So I can just say code. And this is Visual Studio Code, right? Have you guys seen this? Yes? Okay, right. So this is, we've released this completely open source. It's got great capabilities in here. So I can do IntelliSense, right? I can say string stuff equals hello. Let me make that larger, not that large. And I can say stuff dot, and I get string-like things that I can do with it. Now this is coming off of Omni Sharp, right? That library that we built that's a plugin for other editors. We've actually standardized that server interaction, right? Because Omni Sharp actually stands up its own little server hosting the Roslyn compiler. And every time you look at a file, it actually recompiles that with Roslyn in memory, in the background. And this little flame here is showing you that it's running out there. There used to be a way to pull up a status panel on it, and I don't think I can do that anymore. But you can actually see it running in the background, and all it's doing, it's the same thing Visual Studio does. It's compiling as you type things, so it can give you cool features inside the editor. So that's not bad. I like seeing that. But this is Visual Studio, right? And one of the hallmarks of Visual Studio is extensions. So I've installed a couple of extensions here to help me with running NPM scripts. making JSON look pretty. I've got a new version of Visual Studio Code. Cool. And the C# plugin comes by default with Visual Studio Code. So I can add on things here, like there's Angular snippets and things here, right, that I can add in. And it's this huge community because these things are all written in TypeScript on top of, Visual Studio Code's actually written on top of Electron, right? The editor that the GitHub folks use that's the basis for the Atom editor, right? And Atom is built on top, Atom's built on top of Electron. Electron is built on top of Chrome, right? Isn't that weird? Right, so I can actually go and say view debug. Nope, not that one. Where is it? There's a way to bring up. Is it F12? Is F12 still in here? I thought it might have been turned off. Yeah, it's turned off now. You used to be able to bring up, yeah, it's now go to definition. You used to be able to bring up the actual browser tools and be able to go through the DOM Explorer inside of Visual Studio Code. So that's kind of cool. There is a debugger here if you want to attach to and debug your application. So right inside this, let me save that, come back to my files. Let me go into my controller, home controller. So let's put a break here. I can't run it on the command line. I can actually run it from inside of Visual Studio Code. And let's run it with .NET Core. Fine. That's what I get for ignoring that thing that said, oh, you need to configure your project. No test runner. Configure it. .NET Core. Come on. Now, there is a terminal here, so I can also go to my terminal and see what's going on. Oh. I'm going to do this the easy way. I'm going to cheat. Just restart so I get that prompt so it configures it for me. No. It didn't configure it for me. Oh. All right, let me go to that other one that I built, which was, what did I call it?
Mac on the Beach.
Mac on the Beach, thank you. So I'll look at this one, which should look pretty much the same. And I should get the prompt for, I'm not going to get it, watch this. There it is. Now it's configured everything. It creates a little VS Code folder here, so it stays outside of my project. It's not something that's going to be included, and because it's a dot folder, right, we know that it's kind of hidden to us. So let me go back into my controllers and I'll set the breakpoint here. Zoom in a little. And now if I go back to the debugger, right, I do get debugging capabilities, right? Oh. And I still get the cool orange bar at the bottom so that I know I'm in debug mode. Navigates, and I get a breakpoint. And I get all the same things where a call stack, locals, a watch, all those things that I wanted in Visual Studio 2015 on a Mac, you have inside of Visual Studio Code. And the team that's actually working on Visual Studio Code is a bunch of the guys that were working on Visual Studio 2015 on the C# team. We've lifted them up, put them over here and said, hey, help bring some of those cool features to Visual Studio Code. And that's what they're doing. So you're going to see more and more features light up here. And these guys, they're releasing once a month new features into Visual Studio Code. And there's even a canary build, right? That nightly build that you can get for Visual Studio Code. You may have seen it on my other machine. It's a green Visual Studio icon. And you'll get nightly builds if you're really interested in building extensions or adding features into Visual Studio Code. It is open source, so I better show you that it is actually out there. So if I go to github.com, yes, there is a Microsoft on github.com. And there it is, VS Code, right? It's built on top of an open source editor. using TypeScript, an open source programming language, using an open source tool in Omni Sharp with an open source compiler, we better open source the editor, right? So here's everything. If you wanted to take Visual Studio Code and build and create your own editor because you're a software company or something, you can do that. Everything is here. More than welcome to fork and build your own. In fact, 2,200 people have forked and started building their own versions of Visual Studio. So that's cool. So let's see, we've gone through and looked at a couple of those simple things. One thing that we've added to the command line that I think is really handy, that I know Linux developers really appreciate, folks who are on those other more interpreted programming languages, right? PHP, Ruby, where you can just change a file and restart real quick, right? I mean, if I run my project here, right, it compiles and then it's sitting there running. If I go and change something inside of here, right, let me just, right, so there it is on 5,000. If I go to the About page, it's actually got to go through the whole request process and run this. And, okay, but if I'm in here and I actually change this, this is my About page, and I change this to, right, and refresh, well, I don't get that update, right? Because I'm not in an interpreted language, I'm in a compiled language. So is there a way that we can get that to recompile when things change? We've actually deployed a tool called Dotnet Watch. So you can add this into your project. It's a developer tool. So we really want to add it not in with our dependencies, right? Our dependencies are packages that we're referencing so that we only include these pieces when we deploy our application. When we want to include one of these tools that's really developer focused and doesn't get deployed with our project, we put it in the tools section here. So I'm actually going to add, let me talk about Secret Manager in a minute. I'm going to add this tool called Microsoft.net. That's weird. Microsoft.net. Yeah. Watcher tools. And then I get to specify a little bit of information about the version. Yes. 1.0.0. I don't care after 1.0. Give me any of those. By specifying a star there, it says give me any of the preview versions, right, that occur after this, but that has to start with 1.0.0. And I'm going to import. Now, imports is kind of a tricky thing. You may have seen me use this in another session. What this is a lie. Okay? And there's a couple of these imports things here. These are lies to Nuget. What's happening here is we've got a community that's built a ton of packages over the past how many years, right? Past 5-6 years that Nuget's been around. And they support .NET 4.5.1, .NET 4.5, the Windows 8 store, right? This DNX Core 50, right? That was an older version, a pre-release version of ASP.NET Core. And the problem that we had was, how do we get compatibility with those things when we release something new, like .NET Core, like ASP.NET Core? So what we did was we conjured this imports capability. And what imports says is, you might not know what ASP.NET Core is, but if this package has something that is in this collection of frameworks, so right, portable dash, that's the portable framework, right, the PCL framework identifier. So if it's .NET 4.5.1 or Windows 8, try that, right? I'm not committed to this. Try ASP.NET Core. Try .NET Core first, but try those also if you don't find anything. So that's kind of interesting. So if I save that, come back over here and do .NET restore, it's going to restore my packages, and it should tell me that it's restoring the Watcher tool while I wait for it to go through and recalculate all of its dependencies. There we go. Restoring packages for Razor tools, Entity Framework tools. There it is, Watcher tools. Okay? So now, when I go to the command line, I can say .NET Watch run. Now, right, it's a tool. I've added this tool into the .NET toolchain, right? It's not just .NET run, .NET restore, .NET build. I've added features to my command line, right? So this is something that you're going to see us do more and more of, and we're documenting so that other folks who have other tools can add in and supplement, and we can grow our .NET community. So now this is running out there, and if I come back, I should get my new content here. There it is. But if I want to change that, and if I came back here and I actually changed my code, right? It restarted. I saved, it saw a change in that C# file, it recompiled, it restarted, and now I can go back to my browser and it's running and I will get the new content. So we're enabling this experience by adding features to our .NET command line to augment the compiler. And we very much know that 3.3 seconds for a recompile, just so I can do something like that with my C# code, is actually a long time. So we're doing things to optimize the compiler so that instead of doing a full compile here, we'll just apply those changes and deploy just those changes so you get a faster experience. So .NET Watch is the new feature that we've added here, and we're going to be optimizing it. We think this is an important tool, not just for watching how your application is running, but for being able to do some other debugging, diagnostic type things as you change code. So that's kind of a cool tool that we have out there. But the other thing that I want to make sure that you see that we haven't really shown is Entity Framework, right? You guys know what Entity Framework is? Okay, you're all nodding. I'm guessing you're all Windows developers looking at the Mac. You just came here to see me run my mouth again? Okay, that's fine. So Entity Framework, let's take a look at that real quick. When we bring Entity Framework, right, that's our object relational mapper, right, ORM tool that we have available to us so that we can use C# to query a database without actually writing SQL, right, or SQL. Which one is it? SQL? SQL? SQL. Okay. So, and then, right, there was a whole thing about AT-ATs also, right? Is it AT-AT, the walker in Star Wars, or is it AT-AT? It's AT-AT, right? There was actually like proof that George Lucas calls it this, and J.J. Abrams calls it this. It's AT-AT, not AT-AT. So, SQL, AT-AT, same thing. So let me show you a little bit about Entity Framework. I have a project here. Let me go, I believe I called it, yep. So this is the Nerd Dinner sample, right? I showed this the other day. It's the current version of it is actually in my private repository because we're not, it's under my user ID because we're working on updating this for everybody to see. You'll see a blog post in the next week or so announcing that Nerd Dinner is back and it's on ASP.NET Core. But what's really cool about this is it runs with Entity Framework and it runs everywhere. So if I look at my source for this, come on, thank you. So let's run code on this one. So this is completely cross-platform aware and capable ASP.NET Core code because I have it running on Windows, I have it running here on a Mac, and excuse me, if you look at my persistence here, I have, excuse me, I have a DB context just like we had before, right? Inside of the older versions of Entity Framework with DB sets around some model type. And here's my model types. It's a dinner, and just like in previous versions of Entity Framework, I've got attributes that decorate with the different things that I want to communicate to the database, right? These fields are required, these are maximum lengths, etc., etc. Now, I can do entity framework interactions. We used to be able to do migrations and updating our database from PowerShell inside of Visual Studio, right? And in Ruby, you do scaffolding, and you can apply things with active record to the database so that everything gets configured right away. But we don't have PowerShell here because this is a Mac. Mac doesn't have PowerShell, neither does Linux. So how do we do that? Inside the project JSON file, and you'll get this by default when you stand up. Oh, we don't have it in this project. Oh no. Oh no. I had it in the other one. We actually add a line for entity framework tools inside of project JSON, and it's not in this one. So, yeah, that's a problem. That's what I get for not looking at my sample code before I start talking about it. All right, so let's do another yo ASP Net. And I will create a full web application, so and we will call this Forgot My EF Demo. So this time it's going to configure everything so that I have a database so that I can do my interactions and store users and all those types of things. And it, by default, comes with SQLite. Right? Why SQLite? We don't have SQL Server. Why not Postgres? I don't know if you have Postgres. By using SQLite, I'm bringing my own DLL, and I know that database will run everywhere, right? SQLite's just a little file-based database everybody can use. So it's going to chug here for a minute, and eventually it'll pass control back to me. Please. I just want to show entity framework. Come on, man. Do you have any questions about the stuff on the Mac while I'm waiting for this? Or on Linux? Yes, camera guy.
For security, is the new security, like for Kerberos and stuff, is that also being supported in the core? Or is that still coming?
The question is the new security for Kerberos?
Well, the security capabilities in MVC5?
Yes. Okay, the security capabilities in MVC5, as far as being able to specify roles and those types of things. We've actually changed the security model, and we've changed it significantly for the better. The security model that we have for ASP.NET Core revolves around policies. We don't really have roles or explicit capabilities. We have policies that we now have, and those policies define different access capabilities that you have, and those policies define how you are authorized to use things. So we have authentication, who are you? And then when you're authenticated, you're granted an authorization policy. What are you allowed to do? And that's a whole another talk, very in-depth. There's a lot of stuff you can do there. I can show you a link a little bit later to a workshop that'll walk you through configuring security for ASP.NET Core. Really, it's easy to get started with, but once you get started configuring security, you need to make sure you do it properly everywhere and you don't leave any gaps. So that was it, all done. So let me look at the project now, so I don't look like a liar. So what did I call it? Forgot my EF demo, project JSON. Let's get rid of this. So now here in my tools, there it is, Microsoft Entity Framework Tools. So this is augmenting my .NET command so that I can execute EF commands there. So let's go here. That's why it was in the, right? So here, so now I can say .NET EF, right? Entity Framework, that's what EF is. It's going to do a compile. When it's done, we get ASCII art, because all cool modern tools on the command line have ASCII art. So that is a unicorn. Several years ago, the team, it was passed down actually by my boss. The nickname was given to this of Magic Unicorns because you can write things code first. You saw I had the models were defined code first, and it'll generate the database for you. So I've executed just .NET EF. I get a nice help screen here. I can say .NET EF, and I can look at my migrations. Migrations are those configuration bits of code that actually instruct, here's how you configure the database. So let's do .NET migrations list. And it shows me that there's one created, and it's to create my identity schema, right? Because the only thing I configured here was security. So if I look under, it's not under models. I thought there was a migrations. Did they hide it here? No. Where did the migrations go? Oh, data migrations. So here's where the code is to actually update your database. All right? So create a table, apply, set my primary key, but this is set up as C# code, and it'll generate and apply that SQL later, SQL later. So, but this is all generated for you when you just define a new model inside of your project, right? Have you guys seen how to configure Entity Framework? Okay. I don't need to go, I can do a quick demo, show you adding a new context, adding new models. No? We're good? Okay. So, very simple. We brought those tools down so that we do have them on the command line, and you can reuse them. But with Entity Framework, with these other capabilities that we're adding at the command line, we want to deploy and we want to use our new server called Kestrel, okay? Because we don't have IIS because we're on Mac and Linux. So Kestrel is the new web server that we've written. You can see it hiding here in Project JSON, right there. And it's interesting that we took a code name for a web server and marketing didn't change it into Microsoft ASP.NET Core Hosting Server 1.0. No, it's Kestrel. We got to keep our code name. And that's kind of cool, right? You guys know what a Kestrel is, right? It's a swift flying bird. So we've been doing a lot of work on Kestrel. Scott Hunter bragged about performance the other day. Where you can go to learn about the performance on Kestrel. Everything for us starts on GitHub. So if you go github.com, ASP.NET Benchmarks, this is where you can see the performance tests that we're running and the results. Most of the tests that we're running that you'll see here are inside of our dev lab, which is actually a couple of developers' old desktops that we repurposed for this, and we put a gigabit network switch in. So here's the 4 machines that we took from a couple of our engineers because we said, hey, you're building cross-platform stuff now. They said, we want a MacBook. Okay, they got MacBooks. Their old desktops became this. And they're no chump change, 32 gig, right? Love to have that for my desktop. So you can see the definition as to what the tests are. You can see ASP.NET 4.6. So this is MVC. Actually, it's a generic ASP.NET handler. 57,000 requests per second. ASP.NET Core, 313. And this isn't optimized. So when they started optimizing using HTTP pipelining, they start to get out into the millions, which leaves Node in the dust. And this is on their environment, right? Not the big actual performance test machines. So Scott's busting his buttons about this. He really loves seeing these numbers. It's something that we think folks are going to get excited about. Scala and Netty we've passed Scala actually with some of the new code that's out there. But Netty is the big one that they're targeting. So I've shown you a lot of code. I've gone through a bunch of samples and a bunch of stuff on the command line. Do you guys have any questions? We've got about 5-6 minutes left. Yes?
I have a question. I saw in there for unit testing, you guys are using XUnit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested to know, is that similar to why it's using SQLite? And then we don't know that they have.
So here's the thing. XUnit was written by a former engineer on the Asp Net team. So it's like, oh, our buddy Brad wrote that. We really like Brad, so we're going to check out and use his stuff. And Brad wants to keep up with .NET Core and that stuff. So Brad actually got his unit test framework ready for this before we could get MS Test ready. So because the MS Test unit test wasn't ready for it, but Brad was, and we were at the early point, we were all skunkworks trying to get this put together. So he got the stuff ready because he knows our other engineers, and they hang out together. So they got that all running, and we actually had a forked version of XUnit sitting in the ASP.NET GitHub. Hopefully I won't get into trouble here because I have private access to. I'm not logged in. So no, you won't.
I checked to make sure.
Right, but see, I am a member of the ASP.NET team. But this is our forked version of XUnit that we wrote specific, right, that we got Brad's help with to get it working because we need to get it out the door. And then eventually MS Test came around. That now works in .NET Core. Our guys still like XUnit. So, good question, thank you.
Quick question on SQLite.
SQLite, yes.
As far as like the user interface, because back when it was, I guess, first introduced, it was command line only.
Not
6 years
even.
ago, there was like a Visual Studio
There was an adapter for it.
front end that you could have a UI for it. Does
Yep.
that still apply to the multi-platform Linux Mac?
So when you're using SQLite, right, so SQLite's completely open source, and the question is there a user interface we can use to manage this? I know there's one for Windows, SQLite Database Manager and Mac App Store. That sounds good. There you go. It's $5.
SQLite browser is on Windows free.
Yeah, DB browser.
And
That's the one that I use on Windows. So, but you can open it up. I thought there was still an adapter for Visual Studio 2015 you could use, and I think somebody was writing a plugin for this. Let's see if there's a plugin,
Maybe for like
because that'd be really cool.
the current ones suck.
Because the current ones stink. I'm saying that for the folks that are watching on YouTube. Nope, it's not going to find it. Bummer. So, looks like so if you want to write an extension for Visual Studio, try writing one for SQLite. Because there's definitely now a demand, at least from the folks in this room. So, see, and that's an interesting thing about open source, right? And some folks don't quite get this. Microsoft, it's our job to maintain this source code, right, day in, day out. But there's other projects out there that it's somebody in the community, they built a project to solve a need, maybe at their organization or at home, right? And they finished that, and hey, it sounds like it was. They finished that block of code, and it's done. They don't need it to do anything more, but you might need it to do something. And if we go to that person and say, hey, can you add feature X? They're not obligated to go and add that feature for you. It doesn't matter to them if they don't. So, right, we have to get into that open source mindset of create a pull request. The source is open. Hey, why don't you work with me to help build that feature? And that's how we grow communities, right? So, there's just a few minutes left. Yes?
So this recently the project Json, is that still, a few months ago, right, they said they're going to be changing to the CS project, is that correct?
So the question is, Project JSON, it's going to be changing to CS Proj. Is that still true? So here's the thing. If I go back to this, so we've got this support thing happening, right? So we released and we declared that it was the release version. So we're going to support it for 3 years. The 1.0 version that has Project JSON. So if you're programming with Project JSON, You're good for 3 years before we are allowed to say no more, okay? We are going to be changing to the CS Proj, to the MS Build project model when we get to that Dev 15 release with all the final versions of the tools. And the reason is because Project JSON can only add references to Nuget packages. It can't add references to class libraries, and you can't create something that uses Project JSON, right? A class library that uses Project JSON, and publish that to your Xamarin app or to your Windows 10 app. So there's very much this incompatibility that came with Project JSON when we started trying to integrate with the rest of the .NET ecosystem. And the .NET ecosystem is gigantic. So do we move the mountain, or do we move to the mountain? And that's what we're doing. We're going to move to the mountain and make it work. That being said, we're not going to drop those cool things that we've learned to do with Project JSON. MS Build is actually on GitHub, right? Check this out, Microsoft MS Build. There it is, there's MS Build. And this hasn't been, it's being updated now, but it hadn't been significantly updated. There were no significantly new features for almost 10 years. So we're enhancing it, we're gonna bring those features to it that we really like not listing all my files in the project JSON file. It is still gonna be XML, but we want to make this a seamless experience for you to migrate from Project JSON to CS Proj. It's coming. You're still going to be supported on Project JSON because of our support terms, but when it gets there, people should be really happy with it because you will get that portability and compatibility. Let me just go over to the slides and show you the resources that I have to close this out. Yes, come on. Blah, 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 blah. Dumpster, yes. Blah, 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 blah. Demos. I want to just touch the screen, but it's a Mac. So, these are some pretty good links. .net to get you started, download and install everything. ASP.NET is our community site. I run the blog for the web development team at blogsmsdn.com/webdev. Nuget.org is where you'll find your packages. And if you write a package, you build something cool you want to share, publish it out there. Everybody will start finding it and they may start using it. Our documentation, I didn't show that, but that's at docs.asp.net. That's all open source as well. You're welcome to go out there, and if you see something that's not described well because our English isn't too good because we're American, you're welcome to update, submit changes. If you can write something better, cool. It'll go through the same testing and review that our employed document writers are going through. I showed you github.com, ASP.NET. That's where all of the ASP.NET source code lives. And of course, live ASP.NET, that's our community stand-up, right? We're an agile organization. So we're going to have a weekly stand-up meeting with our stakeholders, and that includes you. So check it out. There's a video that they host every Tuesday. We have a write-up that goes on the blog a day or two later that shows all the links and things that we discussed. But we want to keep you up to date as to what's changing as this advances. So my name is Jeff Fritz. If you have any further questions at any time, please grab me on Twitter. I am C# Fritz. Okay? Let me tell you how weird that was first time I met the C# team, and I'm like, hi, my name's Jeff. My Twitter handle is your product. That wasn't intimidating at all. So thanks so much, guys. I appreciate you coming.